Welcome back to the PolicyViz podcast. I'm your host, John Schwabish. On this week's episode of the show, I chat with Cedric Scherer, who is, well, he's awesome at R. Let me just put it that way. He's awesome at R. He's awesome at ggplot. He's awesome at sharing how he creates his data visualizations. And so we talk about Cedric's early use of R. He started with base R. So if you don't know base R, well, he's moved past it. We've talked about his early work in R. We talked about how he approaches sharing his work, how he approaches making things in R, and what he sees going forward. What are the technologies? What are the areas of R? Think Markdown, think notebooks. What does the future of R look like for those of us who are working in the field of data visualization? Speaking of working in the field of data visualization, I am working every other week to bring you this podcast. So if you would like to support the show, please consider heading over to my Patreon page where for just a couple of bucks a month, like a cup of coffee. Well, a cup of coffee is a little bit more than a couple bucks a month these days. But if you would like to support the show with just a few bucks a month, head over to my Patreon page where you can get some goodies and you can help support the show to support all the sound editing and transcription and web support that's needed to bring the show to you. Or if you'd rather just use a one-time payment, you can head over to my PayPal account. But more generally, feel free and please do share the show with your friends, your families, your colleagues, your networks, whoever you think might benefit from learning more about data and data visualization. All right. Having said all that, let me bring you my conversation with Cedric Scherer. Hey, Cedric, how are you? Welcome to the podcast. How are things?
Hi, John. Everything fine here. How are you?
I mean, hanging in there. It's a sunny but cold day here in Virginia, so it's all good. You're in where again?
I'm in Berlin, Germany, and it's already dark here now. It's getting late.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's right. I gotta get you before bedtime. So thanks for coming on. I'm excited to talk about your work on R. We've got, I think, a lot of things to kind of talk about. I want to get your story of like how you got into R, maybe some of your other tools that you use. Maybe we could talk about like, did you use tools before you got into R? And then as we talk about it a little bit more, maybe some of the other tools that you use in and around R. I know a lot of people they'll make something in R, they'll pipe it out as like a PDF and they'll bring it into Illustrator to clean it up. And I'm curious about your process on that. So maybe we could just start with, how did you get to this point of like being like, I don't know, I kind of like now I'm like viewing you as like the data viz guy in R, which I'm sure there are other people out there who are mad at me about saying that, but like, I mean, how did you get to that? What's your sort of R journey to get to where you are now?
Yeah, it's a pretty long journey. Good questions. Maybe so I'm not a graphics person for everyone who doesn't know me. So I'm an ecologist by training, or biologist first. So when I started looking for my courses, I was thinking about graphics design or biology. And I thought like, okay, biology will give me jobs. Graphics design will not. So I ended up doing biology. Yeah, fun story now.
Right.
I still have a biologist job, so that's fine. I already had a passion kind of for design, not so much for coding actually. And then it was the first contact with R was already in my first bachelor semester, 2008 already, but really like just clicking, running code for statistical analysis, base plots. R is very common or became very common around that time for ecologists and biologists to use for analysis. So this was more like really the geeky old R times.
Yeah, like base R. We're talking base R times.
Yeah, linear models all time.
Right.
And base R graphics, and people were using it for statistics, mostly statistics. So nowadays R is very different. You can do all kinds of things. Like you already covered it. It's kind of like plots, tables, web pages. You can write books. You can do really fancy things with it nowadays. But back then it was kind of like the tool to use to do statistics in a proper way. So I also learned about SPSS and Excel. So this was basically, after that first semester, I quickly switched back because I didn't learn much in R, and most people were not using R in my groups. So we were just using Excel and didn't really like the Excel graphs. And then during my bachelor, I was still using Excel, and then during the master, it was more on R courses. Then it became an ecology course studies, and in the ecology, field, there's mainly the people driving also many of the R packages and R developments. And then I started my master's and I got into it more and more. And then towards the end of my master, beginning of my PhD, I found out about tidyverse and ggplot too.
Okay.
So, and then it was really, I fell in love. And during my PhD, I just realized that I spent much more time on designing than on writing. Yeah. So actually, talk to many people, and many people are like, yeah, you're so perfectionist about so many details. You need to drop it if you want to be a successful scientist. You can't spend 3 days on the graphic. And I was like, I don't want to drop it. I know I'm a perfectionist, but I want to keep that and make it a good thing and not a bad thing. So so kind of like morphed after my PhD, I morphed into some more design person. So I'm currently doing both things, being an academic, but also being a freelance designer or consultant, or I mean, there's so many roles for database people.
So when was that you like? That was like right when Hadley had sort of come up with tidyverse and ggplot 2. So that was like right at the very beginning.
I can't really recall. I think ggplot 2 is really common since 2015, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, correct. 2014, 15.
Yeah.
So I should know actually. Anyway, so it was I think 2016, end of 2016. So maybe a bit late. So I wasn't really following the packages. So I met someone and he was completely coding in R, everything. He had his Hugo page and blog posts, and I was just looking at that and was like, oh man, I just know base R. I can't compete. And then we really became friends and we're doing that together. And so he pushed me. And the thing why I was so interested about ggplot, actually, I wanted to do a small multiple, so trellis plot, and which is called facets in ggplot. And it's so easy to do. And with base R, for everyone who knows base R, it was so hard to remove all the labelings and putting it together in the right format. And that's actually one of the best showcases for ggplot, I think, the small multiples.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, whenever I want to do small multiples, I'm going to R to do it, because it's like it's like one extra line of code. Yeah. So which kind of brings me to a related question. So like, is there something about, I mean, I know why I enjoy, and I mean, intro baby R coder, but like, is there something particular about R? Because it sounds like you've coded in a couple of other languages too. Is there something about R, in particular ggplot, that you like? Is it the philosophy of it that you like? Is it just the ease of use? Like, what is it about R versus any other language that like really attracted you to using that particular tool?
Yeah, so even though I'm programming every day, I don't see myself really like a programming person, like an IT programming person. So I'm not really a computer nerd. I don't know much about hardware. I don't know much about bash line, command line stuff.
Yeah.
So it was really also a hard start, but at some point, I also did a lot of my research, or I do a lot of my research just on computational data, so simulation data. So I also picked up a few other programming languages, but most of them not for visualization. So a bit of Python, but this is really like, it's R what we are using. So everyone was using R, so there was basically no choice, or I didn't even think about using something else. And I was very happy actually. So I learned a bit of C++ actually, which I found super complicated for me as a non-IT person, and dealing with compilers and debugging. And I had to build my own functions to just get simple jobs done, which was really annoying me.
Yeah.
And I think with R is the perfect combination. I mean, that's why many true programmers, I call them now, don't like R, maybe because it's something in between. It's easier to read for non-programmers, I would say, and easier to learn maybe than some of the other programming languages.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, it's definitely like there's stuff going on in the hardware. It's back there, but I'm not gonna worry about it.
Yeah, I think for statistics, let me add something. For the statistic, I think it's the programming language, or at least was back then, to do statistics in a reproducible coding way. So I think. Also, I'm not sure about the state of Python, but C++, you don't do statistics, or at least I've rarely seen someone using C++ for statistics.
Right. I mean, and if you are in like a language, I mean, I tried to learn C++ back in college, and that's too long ago. But like in Fortran, for example, if you want to do statistics, you need to code the entire thing. Like it's not like it's not like you load a package or type regression YX and it runs a regression. Like you need to actually invert the matrix and do the whole thing, which is valuable as a learning process. I remember like coding in MATLAB as a statistics class at one point, because you had to invert the matrix, and like that's super useful to understand statistics, but like on a day-to-day, like doing a job is like, I just want to get this done. I need to move on. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
So what does your like workflow look like? Is it simply like just bring the data set into R, do everything in R, export the visualization as a PNG JPEG, and you're done? Or do you have like a whole bunch of things sort of surrounding your workflow?
Yeah, it evolved a bit. So during my PhD, I was mostly programming in R, so I was not really touching any other tools. First of all, because it should be reproducible. So really clicking the code and then the image is returned. So now for my design work, it changed a bit. So I think for these true charts, like academic, scientific figures and some maps and stuff, you really can go the whole route in R and ggplot. You could also do it for more complex things. I mean, we have shown that with Tidy Tuesday. You also had Thomas Mock in your podcast. So people maybe know about Tidy Tuesday. So this is where I really started getting crazy with ggplot, kind of like really tricksing the system, like finding ways to manipulate the code to get whatever I want. But it can be tedious at some point. So I still do most of the work in R. So it really depends also on the client or on the use case, what we have as a final product. So the really nice thing about R still is that it's reproducible. So if you have some project where the data is likely to get updated, I definitely use R. If I have a client who wants to produce hundreds or thousands of plots every day, every week with kind of like updating data, then we need to find a clever algorithm to place the labels nicely. And luckily, there are also many packages for that. And then we do it definitely in R. I also like the notebooks, like the reporting style that you can directly include it. But if it's really about more artsy, more complex data visualizations, so I don't really bother around if I have a one static graphic and I need to place some annotations. I do it usually in Figma because I don't have really other tools I know. So Figma was now what I started with. So it's really, I'm not coming from the design world, so I'm just learning all the designers say it's simple. So I think it's not so simple for me because I kind of need to find the point where I stop in R and then move on.
Right.
And usually I use vector graphics anyway. So I guess 90 to 100%. So it's not really like I've seen Nutty using R and others, and they really kind of like spend maybe 5%, 10% their time in R, and then they move on. And for me, it's definitely much more. So the final thing, it's really like already the final colors or almost the final colors and all the kind of things.
Yeah. So can you mentioned the notebooks. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I would suspect that many R users are familiar with ggplot. They're familiar with R Markdown. But I'm curious about like how you think of notebooks and sort of maybe also your view of like, what does the future of R look like? And maybe that's a broader question, the future of coding, but like, can you talk a little walk me through a little bit, like how you use notebooks in R, and in particular, like your specific process, especially when you're working with a client and maybe you're sharing things back and forth.
Yes. So, so the notebooks in R also work with R Markdown. I mean, it's basically R Markdown reports. And the nice thing about it that you really can use the R Markdown language or the Markdown language to write text surrounding it. And you can also, I mean, there are pretty neat themings and styles to create your reports. You can also write your own CSS and customize it as much as you want. So you can also script it, but I always end up using a Markdown notebook usually. And really depends on what you want to do. So even if I'm just drafting one figure for some challenge or some personal project, I'm using these because it just became my workflow. I also like that I have kind of like a HTML, or you could also knit it or render to a PDF. But I really also like that I have like a copy of my code. So if the code gets lost, I still have this HTML template Also, you can add a session info to the end. So I know which package versions were used and so on, which is a bit more difficult if you do it for an R script, for example. Then you might want to use some images or so, but it's not super easy then to really years later to come back to the same setup, but at least I would have the option to kind of like get back to a package version, which made it possible. I mean, some people write full scientific publications in R. I tried it. I'm not really got lucky with it, but also because, I mean, you need the co-authors on board, or some people then kind of like go to Word and go back to R, but this kind of like got a bit fuzzy. And also it depends really on data. If you have very big data sets, I still find it a bit of pain if you need to knit and it takes a long
it takes
time.
A while to run,
But yeah, I think it's pretty neat. And you asked about clients, so it's the same basically. So you can hide the code and just show the report. You can also have buttons where you can show the code if you want to. So that's mostly my setup. So not showing the code on default. And then if people want to have a look, they can do it if the client knows a bit about R. But these are very simple to share. Yeah, that's the nice thing.
What is your sense? You may not know the answer to this, but what is your sense of people who are writing in R scripts versus people who are writing in Markdown? Do you know like what the split is? Or maybe a better question is like, with the folks that you work with, like what's the split of people using those two approaches?
I think that, it's a bit hard to estimate for me. So I basically have two groups. So the scientists are now those that I know mostly using the notebooks.
Yeah.
For kind of like in the R community on Twitter and so I see both, but also mostly Markdown, which might be because I'm a tidyverse fan. So
sure.
I mean, you may know that there's kind of like this people who use the tidyverse and people who don't use it. And I think people who use the tidyverse are also more likely to use RStudio and everything RStudio provides. So I think even though non-tidyverse user might use the RStudio, they might not use R Markdown, just like a subjective feeling maybe.
Right.
So I'm kind of like, I like what RStudio is doing. I like these ideas of having notebooks. So I definitely using it. And I'm also suggesting it to others. So when we have new PhD students starting, I mean, also the younger generations, they anyway learn that now. Yeah. I think it's more about the older ones who just know their old routines and they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, if it's from a collaborative position, that makes sense that maybe scientists are more likely to use the notebooks because they are multi-person teams and maybe it's a little bit easier to collaborate as opposed to like sharing a script back and forth. Even if you're like doing a Git version control, maybe the notebooks are a little bit easier to do that collaboration.
Yeah, it's also a collection of your output, right? If kind of in an academic context, I'm creating also in a client context, I'm creating like, I don't know, 20, 50, 100 plots, explorative things, different designs, depending on the current stage. So it's easy also to collect them in one document. You can just scroll through and you don't have to open it and find the file again. And also in terms of talking about ggplot 2 or about visualization with R, the nice thing about these notebooks or about R Markdown is that you have kind of like settings, how high and wide these images should be. And then you see it the same way, because if you are an RStudio user, you know that the plot window where the visualization shows up, it's not what you then really see in the end when you save it. So that's a way to fix the aspect ratio of the graph. So to really see how they look when you save them.
Right. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your site, the tutorials on the site, and your book plans. So you've got a ton of R tutorials on your site. And what I've noticed you're doing lately on Twitter is, I think kind of ingenious, is like, you seem to like ask a question, like what is your biggest challenge of like adding labels in an R plot? And you sort of give people like 4 or 5 options, and then you basically like write a blog post about like the best way to do it. So can you tell folks a little bit about the site and about the tutorials and maybe your kind of philosophy of how you figure out what you want to write about and what you want to talk about, and like the challenges you're trying to solve for people?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Big question.
Yeah. you know me. I go for the big things. I'm not gonna let you off the hook here.
So for the one big tutorial I have on my homepage, this is really, this was my learning, and at some point I wanted to share it. So this was based on a tutorial by someone called Zev Ross, and he's also producing ggplot tutorials for free. And as mentioned, I found ggplot thanks to the faceting option, and I just jumped in. And as many of us, we kind of like just copy pasted code from some random pages, mostly Stack Overflow. And at some point I was like, okay, why isn't this working? Typical problems. And I was like, okay, just give myself 1-2 days, go through the whole full tutorial and kind of like create my own version out of it. And then I kind of like updated it. And I mean, as mentioned, I'm a perfectionist, so I wasn't happy about the default look. So I was also polishing the plots, which Zev already provided. And at some point, I gave it a major update, working on it every weekend for a few months. And yeah, now it contains, I don't have the exact number, but I think 120 different ggplots. Wow. Most of them scatter plots, nevertheless, because it's really about like, okay, how do I color the axis text on the x-axis, but also a bit about plot types. So there's no mapping yet in there. So there are many, many more things to cover. So this is how I ended up, thinking about writing a book, and people approached me. So the original idea was really this is kind of like a how-to tutorial. So how do I do ABC? Yeah. The idea was to turn that into a book. It now merged a bit with also having a broader context of how to create, or how to do graphics design with ggplot 2, kind of like doing these more complex things with all in R without any post-processing with any of the other tools, Illustrator, Inkscape, Figma. Right. Maybe also a combination of both, how to work with that, but more like not so much on the technical details, but more about the creativity when you're working with code as well, because you also need to be creative to achieve with code what you want to having on your on your final plot. So it's not only about the creativity in terms of color and chart type and all these kind of things and story. It's also about the creativity. How can I force ggplot to do what I want? Right. So
No, I was just gonna say, like, so how do you think about a book? I mean, my always concern about writing like tools books is like the tools change so, especially now, they just change so quickly, and like packages are always being updated, and like today, what you might have to sort of make a workaround for, tomorrow there'll be a package where it'll just be like, hey, load this package and you're good to go. So how do you think about that as you work through the book? Is it just, this is just where we are right now, and follow along with like the website or this other thing, and you'll see some updates? Like how do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely something we discussed a lot. So I'm relying on a lot of extension packages. But only those I need. So let's maybe first kind of like build the philosophy of how I use extension packages. So for example, I'm not using a package which allows me to do a dumbbell chart or a lollipop chart, because I can do that with ggplot 2. But for example, if it's kind of like allowing me to create a fancy Zenke bump chart, there's a package out there, I will definitely use it, because I don't want to code it on my own. So it really depends. What you mentioned also about MATLAB, for example. So if it's kind of like doable for me, and I now have quite some ggplot experience, so I know how to code many of these things without the other packages. So I'm trying to replace them. But there are definitely some packages which are there, and they are there to be used. Right. Some of them are not even really officially hosted on this thing called CRAN, or the CRAN, however you pronounce it. Yes.
There's another good question. We'll see what the split is on that one. CRAN versus CRAN.
I learned it's officially CRAN, but
okay. I've always called it CRAN. So
but most people call it CRAN, so I'm always saying both. Ending up saying both, which is kind of like plain stupid, because I'm saying like. I'm saying the correct name, no one understands me, and then I'm saying the wrong name, and then everyone is confused.
Oh, right, yeah.
Just showing how nerdy I am. I don't know. I lost. What's very we were talking about the packages in the books. So something we definitely discussed, and I kind of like made a list which packages I definitely need. And we will have an online version. It will be hosted on GitHub, so I will kind of like really try to keep it up to date. That's another thing, just beside the book. Also, if you kind of like working with ggplot or in any programming language, things change so fast, so you really need to kind of like be up to date. And I kind of like, it's super interesting that to see every few days something new and to find something new. But at the same time, it can be also very stressing. So I'm getting older, so I kind of like thinking about what happens when I don't want to scroll through Twitter every day and find new packages.
Right. No, but it's a very smart way to go about it, right? Because then it doesn't matter. It's not just like, oh, I know how to make the reader, I know how to make a dot plot now because I follow Cedric's like step by step. I don't need any other packages. I can do it. But I'm sure just learning that helps me do a bunch of other things that I don't also need packages for. Yeah,
it's more this idea. I mean, I get many questions. I find it very difficult to build a workshop on that, but I often get questions like, okay, how do you come up with this exact idea? So from the design perspective, I mean, you maybe also get these questions. And then, I mean, of course, there are inspirations, but also some things you've just learned and you cannot even maybe say what exactly it is, that you see things differently than others.
Right.
Especially when it comes to colors and font choice sometimes as well. But colors are super hard, I think. Maybe Lisa helps us now to kind of just say like, buy her book and you will know.
And you're all set.
But in general, but also with the coding. So I think, as mentioned, I'm not a super coder, so I'm not writing many new functions. So I'm really trying to trick the system. Just today, I was super happy about some neat trick I did. I needed to have two colors, but I already had the fill and the other color reserved for something else. And I used kind of like transparency as a third level. And these things make me just happy. And more sharing. Yeah, and this after 6 years now into ggplot, I still kind of like every few days I find something new or a new trick or something.
Yeah.
So it's more a collection of kind of like these approaches. How can you approach these things, and how could you maybe come up with something, which is not kind of like really in these usual teaching books things like, okay, the next step is adding a layer, the next thing is adding a coordinate system.
Right.
It's more thinking out of the box maybe.
Right.
And going beyond it. So also, I mean, there are many ggplot books, and I also got these questions. I mean, I proposed the book and then also got feedback, something like, but there's already the cookbook, for example, and it will not be like, okay, how do I build a box plot with some jitter and a label with the sample size? It will be more like, okay, the way I think ggplot, let's put it like this.
Yeah. More of the philosophy.
Yeah, maybe.
Like a cookbook. Yeah. Well, it sounds great. I will look forward to it. We'll see if I can finally sit down and do it. Yeah, I'll give you some time. Yeah. So before I let you go, I wanted to back way out and ask you whether you think, this is like a philosophical question, whether you, because there's always a conversation about this, but I'm curious whether you think everyone should learn to code.
No, definitely not. I mean, everyone should anyway. I don't like these kind of like hard rules or hard like yes no decisions.
Right.
So should anyway. So everyone may benefit from coding, but I also don't think everyone would. But let's focus on our kind of like bubbles we have, like the design bubbles or the analysts, and I think designers could really learn a lot or kind of like use it a lot. And I mean, we see it with ggplot now, also with D3 and all these other libraries we see now emerging. Also in Python, there are some interesting ones. I think there's a benefit. I mean, I heard about people who really kind of like, type in their numbers in their design tool, and then if they need to update it, they just type it again.
Right.
So I think of automating some of these things. And I'm coming from the complete coding perspective. So I think at some point I'm missing like, what can I do outside of coding? So because I feel always challenged to do it with code. Right. At the same side, I mean, you do what you feel comfortable with, but I think also many things can be more efficient. And I think Martin Lambrecht mentioned it to me in the very beginning, like, why are you doing everything with ggplot 2? For the Tidy Tuesday challenges, for example, this is kind of like the rule, right? There are also people not doing everything in ggplot, but for me, it was kind of like, for sure, I code everything in ggplot 2. That's the task. So, but sometimes I was sitting in the night just 3 hours to place my labels based on coordinates, which is then at some point, so I got really tired about that, for example. So I still do it, but if I see someone doing these crazy kind of like Fleißarbeit in German, like work where you just need to pay lots of time to kind of be perfectionist about it. I think a combination is good, but I think coding, I mean, in a world full of kind of like being digital and full of computers and smartphones, I think it's anyway a good idea to maybe deal with these things that are around us anyway. Right. And then in terms of efficiency, I think, and in terms also of honesty, I mean, if I type in my numbers into some design tool, it's pretty hard to check. It's not only pretty hard to update, but it's also pretty hard to check. I mean, if it's more really about reporting, I think this is important to be transparent, to be honest about what's the data. And we see it also that it becomes more and more the standard. I think not only in the scientific community, but also in the business and also maybe in the data design world. So I think that's definitely a good thing. And also, I mean, I love to share. And I mean, I wouldn't be here with all the people doing great stuff for the R community, and also the DataViz community helped me a lot. So I love to share. I think I can share my codes. It's hard to share something like I clicked here, I clicked there, I need to write a blog post, but here I just share my code. Right. People can pick it up, people can get inspired, reuse it, and I learn from them again, and they learn from me. And I think it's also a very neat exchange.
Yeah, I think all that's spot on. Although I fear there may be someone listening to this who is all excited about going to your site and learning R, and then heard you just say you spent 3 hours one night trying to get the labels in the right spot. And you're like, nah.
Those were many labels. And I mean, I'm not talking about labels on the axis. Just to be clear, I'm talking about annotations now, right?
Right. Okay, so hopefully people aren't too scared off, and they'll give it a shot.
Yeah,
they should check out your site, and then the book when it comes out, and there'll be a GitHub site and a online compendium probably. So that's all great. Cedric, thanks so much for coming on the show. Always good to chat with you. And take care.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks everyone for tuning into this week's episode of the show. I hope you learned a lot about using R, and I hope you'll check out the episode notes to this show. I've put in a lot of the links to Cedric's work. His website is a treasure trove of free downloadable information and code that you can use to improve how you create visualizations in the R programming language. Okay, until next time, this has been the PolicyViz podcast. Thanks so much for listening.